Okay, it is 8:19, November 8th, 2024, Friday. I have a busted look. My friend punched me in the face. You know who you are. Thank you for that. Um, and I wanted to start making videos where I write down a lot of my thoughts that I have because I feel like I think a lot and I'd like to talk to other people, to all kinds of people. So something I've been thinking about a lot is coping because I went through something that's pretty hard for me recently, and I kind of just got out of the depression it put me in. You know, I had an eating disorder. I lost like 15 pounds in 2 weeks, and yeah, I was just having a rough time. Now I feel normal, and I'm able to look back on it and rate how well I dealt with it or gain new insight about the world, people, emotions, and myself. So nobody knows how to cope, I think, because we're not taught it. Emotional intelligence and emotional health isn't really something that is enforced on us. The elementary school I went to, we kind of had this once a month guidance. I think maybe it was more like once every 6 months. Once, once in a blue moon, we would have a meeting with a guidance counselor as a class, and they would talk to us about, I don't know, empathy and being kind to others and the golden rule and stuff. And that's all great, but it kind of stops after elementary school, And I feel like we need to get deeper into those topics. But I was homeschooled, not all my life, after 8th grade through high school. And I think being homeschooled is one of the greatest things that ever happened to me because it gave me a very, very unique perspective on everything, and I think it allowed me to fully find myself, if that makes sense. I didn't want to be homeschooled. It was like the worst thing ever at first. But anyways, nobody knows how to cope. We're not taught it by our parents, by our teachers, by anybody, because who knows? But I think there's two big fronts on coping, which is emotional health and then emotional intelligence. So with emotional health, what I think a lot of people don't really understand is that, say you're like 5 years old, there's one time your dad just yells at you really loud and maybe he throws something at the wall. You're feeling very betrayed, very hurt, very fearful in that moment. And if you don't know how to cope by yourself, or if you don't have anybody to sit with you and teach you how to cope with the feeling, and validate your feelings and help you make you feel better, so that it doesn't become unresolved. Because when it becomes unresolved, it just stays there. Just because you're 20 years older now, and it doesn't bother you, you've just learned to live with it. You haven't fully dealt with it. You haven't integrated that part with you. And what I mean by parts is that when traumatic things happen to us, we kind of split into parts, and that phrasing kind of does sound like what's it called? I forget what it's called now, but multiple personality disorder. There's a better term for it, but it's not coming to me right now. It's not in here. So, but what I'm talking about is a lot different than that. So, with triggers, I think a lot of people don't know, or maybe I should phrase that differently. My understanding of triggers is that when you are triggered, you are taken back to who you were when that trigger became a thing. So, a lot of times when people get upset, they're like 8 years old, 5 years old. They're in that mindset. That is who they are in that moment because those feelings are so unresolved. It has to force its way out to feel validated, or not to feel validated, to protect you from that happening again, from those feelings. And I mean, that's why a lot of times, we'll catch ourselves being like, in a situation, maybe with your partner or something, and they like raise their voice, and then you suddenly feel like you're 8 years old again. I remember I would see a lot of TikToks like that where it's like, I don't know, when he raises his voice at me, and suddenly I'm 8 years old again, which is the same example I just used, but you know, that what that is that it's a part coming up. It's been triggered, and now it's there, front and center, and it's trying to protect you from that happening again. So yeah, that's when you don't sit with your emotions and deal with it. That's what happens. So what do you do after? You didn't deal with it when it happened. How do you deal with it now? When the I think the best time to do it for me, there's a thing called parts work, um, which is it's kind of hard to get to the point to do parts work, but I'll explain that in a second. Parts work is just the act of validating that part that's coming up that's triggered, and you can do it when you're not triggered. If you're super aligned, like your soul and your body is super aligned, um, which really just means your mind and your body super aligned, your emotions, everything. You know yourself very well. It will be a lot easier to do parts work because you can just connect with that part of you that is upset about this. A lot of other people can't do that because they don't know themselves very well. Because they're running away from their problems instead of coping with it and feeling it through, because we're not taught to do that. And parts work. So basically, my mom taught me this, and my mom is she's a genius. I look up to her very much. She's autistic, fun fact, or on the spectrum, and she is just a genius when it comes to emotions, physical health, anything medicinal, and it's just her whole life, and she's a very spiritual person too. She's a big hippie, so she really is like changes my perspective on stuff all the time, and she taught me what like parts work was. So the way she explained it to me is just it's validating those feelings, like I said earlier. And with parts work, what you do is that when you're triggered, or if like I said, you're aligned and you connect with those feelings, those unresolved feelings easily, you just sit with it and fully validate it. Like say if you have an angry part, you always get angry about this. You just got to be angry, let it all out. And you can, like, journaling is the best way to do that, or having someone like walk you through it. But not everybody has someone to walk them through it. So this is all about taking control of your life, and yeah, because if you take control, you can just get through anything, But it's hard to get there. It's a lot easier said than done. So yeah, parts work. You sit there, you validate those emotions, and the best way to do it, I find, is, like, what am I feeling? I'm feeling betrayed. How old am I? Which some people can get that real easy, like, oh, I feel 9 years old, or I feel 7. But if you can't answer any of these questions, you just ask more answers around it to, like, get the whole picture. I think what the best way to put it is that you need to treat yourself like you would treat your friend who's hurt, or your sibling who's hurt, or someone you care for, and you're trying to help them cope. Because, why wouldn't you help yourself the same way you would help someone else? So yeah, you ask all those questions. What are you feeling? How old do you feel? What does it feel like to be betrayed? And then you describe it. Like, can you remember the first time you've been betrayed? And then it's really important to find like key moments where you felt betrayed, or whatever feeling it is. And I feel like I find that the earliest one is pretty important too. So it's just finding the earliest one, like, oh, my dad did this when I was real young, or my best friend did this when I was young, and it left me feeling like I am replaceable, something like that. And yeah, and then basically what you do is that you just validate yourself. You're like, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you, which you can just write this out, or you can do it in your head. I don't care. And yeah, so you just validate yourself. I'm sorry that happened to you. And especially if it's with a loved one, you can be like, your father, your mother, your aunt, whatever, loved you very much, but they were just too hurt to show it. You just explain and try to help what your younger self have the understanding you do. And that's how you integrate parts so that they don't come up as triggers anymore. Like, you'll remember it, but it's not, the hurt isn't going to be there anymore, because if we don't have any parts come up and any triggers, the only thing that's left is the sting from the actual event. And that's not as long as parts last for. That's why when people get into breakups, they take years to get over it, because, being in a relationship with somebody is so intimate. Obviously, it's the most vulnerable thing you can have with anybody. And, the only thing you can really compare that to is like family. Those are the only people who know you as well as maybe a partner would. And so, if things are bad with your partner, you're definitely going to have a lot of familiar trauma and familiar parts come up. Familial parts come up. And yeah, so that's why it's so hard for people to fully get over breakups, because instead of really chasing that down to get to the root, they just go ignore it. They go party, they just Instagram Reels all day, TikTok, eat, don't eat, go to the gym all the time. But, it's good to have healthier coping mechanisms. I myself am a big fan of the gym, but I'm also a big fan of the journal. So, yeah, it's just, we don't know how to validate ourselves and fully sit with those emotions, And the thing is, I don't think a lot of people would be able to hear this and just go do it. Because, if you've been running away from all these emotions your whole life, why would you be able to just stop? Because you've left a wall. You've left a defense mechanism there so that it doesn't happen again. You don't get hurt like that. Because it is a defense mechanism at the end of the day. That's why if, you had an alcoholic father who would hit you sometimes, you might overreact when your friends are drinking around you, And it's because you're trying to protect yourself from the hurt that your father gave you. So it's just, yeah. So I think another thing is that, I think I mentioned it, but I myself went through something that was really, really tough for me to go through. And I coped with it very fast. It feels like I went through a year or two of coping in a few days. And the way I did that is, the majority of the progress was at the end, but it lasted over 2 weeks. And for the first week and a half, it hadn't even happened yet. But everything was so bad that I had to cope for that. I knew it was going to happen. So basically, like I said with the parts, that you just have to let it all out. If you have an angry part, a hateful part, let it all out. You have to write all your hateful thoughts, all your angry thoughts. But that also doesn't just apply for that. It applies for your sad thoughts. It applies for, say you can't see somebody anymore, right? But they wronged you. So you have to write all the parts that are hurt. Let them all out to validate that one. But then you also have to validate the one that misses them, that loved them, You have to validate all of them. So if you're afraid of something happening, you have to the best way to cope with stuff like that, with anxiety of the future or something specific happening, say good one, you've been cheated on, or you think you're being cheated on, and you just have a feeling it's happened, right? Most people are going to run away from that thought. They don't want to hear about it. They want to go distract themselves. They don't want to think about the possibilities. They don't want to think about the details. But in reality, we need to think about the nitty and gritty and the nasty and vile stuff, because that's the only way we're going to cope with the parts that would come up from it, so that if that happens, you're not dealing with all of this trauma coming up from the rest of your life. You're only dealing with the sting and validating your emotions then, so that it doesn't become a part that comes up later in life. So yeah, I find that wait, let me preface this actually. So my parents are huge hippies. They are, they believe in reincarnation, soulmates, soul ties, chakras, like tarot cards, all that jazz, all that cool stuff. And I'd say like I align with them. I'd say I'm a bit of a spiritual person. Um, so uh, we do believe that psychedelics and marijuana can be great tools. Great tools to help for mental health and really like not. I hate saying like enlightenment because that sounds weird and cultish, but just hiring your understanding of people or hiring your capability of understanding of people because the only way to further your understanding without like therapy or psychedelics or stuff like that is to be hurt, is to get really hurt and then heal from that. Because the best people are usually people who have hurt others and who have been hurt, because then you can fully understand everything. And what my mom always says is that souls crave contrast. That in one life they might be bad and the next they might be good, because that's just how like the pendulum swings. And that kind of applies to the day to day as well. People who do heal, because not everybody heals and becomes a good person. Some people are just going to be bad people, and that's just how it is. But the thing is, when I'll get to that in a second. I have a pretty big problem with just going off everywhere because I just love talking. I love talking about things and things that I understand well, or things I want to understand well, things I want to talk about. So yeah, weed and mushrooms, psychedelics. Don't know what I was talking about. I'm gonna give it a second and try to remember. So okay, I'm just gonna go on a whim here. I'm gonna guess. Parts and hurt people. I know what I was about to say that I was gonna say for later. I guess I'll just say it now. That 3 months ago, my mother told me that there is no good and evil, and I'm like, what? I don't believe that. And now, after what I've just been through and having to understand it all, I don't believe there's good and evil. There is just people who are hurt and people who aren't hurt. Now, shit, that's crazy. That's a crazy thing to say. Like, get off the stage, boo, tomato, tomato. But hear me out here. I'll talk about that again later. I think the reason a lot of people wouldn't agree with that, and the reason I didn't agree with that until recently, is because emotional intelligence is not something that is super important. So that's the second part that I think is really important for coping. The first one was emotional health, and now it's emotional intelligence. Boom. So, emotional intelligence is just, I think, is the ability to think about emotions intelligently. And, that's duh. But a lot of people don't take critical thinking into emotional situations because they're emotional and they don't know how to take care of their emotions. And if you know how to take care of your emotions, you can be emotionally intelligent. Like, I think we praise other forms of intelligence a lot, like people who are good at math, people who are really good at school, or musicians and stuff. And I think emotional intelligence needs to be something that's very prioritized and very important, because people who can fully understand the person they have a disagreement with, like that is how you actually grow and change things, especially if it's with a loved one, a family member, a friend, a partner. If you have the ability to fully understand that other person, you're going to be able to fully fix the problem, because then it's not going to be like you're putting your feelings to the side for them. It's going to be that you fully understand them, and then you can be like, okay, I can validate my feelings, I can validate their feelings, so let's find a middle ground if we both understand each other. So I think the biggest one of the biggest things with coping, especially when it comes to parents that want apologizes, or that exes you won't ever see again that won't change, that you have to understand them, learn how to understand people, learn emotional intelligence, and then understand the person who hurts you so that you can fully let go. Because oftentimes when bad things happen to us, we're like, why did that happen? Why did they do this? I thought they loved me. The works. And that's completely valid. So that's why we go back looking for closure, or like closure. Oftentimes we want to hear something specific, and they're not ever going to tell us what that is. So, or maybe they will. Everybody's different. I'm just saying, in that scenario that I just made up. But yeah, like understanding the people who hurt you will help you let go. And all in all, you have to not let go to let go. You have to live in that part of you that needs to sob violently, that needs to stay in bed all day, that can't eat, that has to throw up all the time, that needs to smoke weed all the time, or stuff like that. Which, with the weed thing, I think it's a very fine line between coping and ignoring. Because I think a lot of people, what they do is that they just smoke weed to ignore it, they drink to ignore it. And I'm not a very big fan of alcohol because it's a neurotoxin. It doesn't really have benefits like marijuana and psychedelics do. Also, psychedelics isn't something you should be doing regularly. That's like it's like big things. I always say it's kind of like 7 years of therapy, in a few hours. But I'm gonna explain that in both of those more in a second. But yeah, so it's just we kind of live in a society that doesn't reward that. That kind of shuns that. That's not normalized. Like, whoa, you're checking yourself into rehab. Like, whoa, that's crazy. Like, when really, sometimes we just need to rest. And the biggest problem is that people aren't going to understand what that kind of tiredness is. If you haven't been depressed, you're not going to understand how much effort it truly does to get out of bed, how much effort it truly does to take the shower, to brush your teeth, or to do all of these things. And I'm a very healthy person, or I try to be. I eat clean. I stay away from sweets just because I'm not a very big fan. I work out all the time, and I stay active. I live on a farm, so we do a lot of work. But I wasn't being true to myself. I was doing things that, sidebar, souls and alignment. So you can, if you're not a spiritual person, you don't believe in souls, that's okay. You can do this with your mind and your body. So I'm just gonna say soul. You can say brain if you're not into that. So when your soul and your body is aligned, you're not going to be conflicted. You're not going to be confused about things, and you're going to feel like yourself. You're going to look like yourself. But if you don't know how to take care of yourself, you don't have the emotional health or intelligence to do so. You're going to become you're going to become less and less aligned. And I don't know if everybody relates to this, but this is something me, my family, and a few of my friends have noticed. But do you ever just see a person that is exceptionally ugly? And it's not even anything about their physical. It's more about their the energy that they're bringing. And it's just like or actually it does like affect the physical as well. It just looks like they've been consumed by bitterness, And you can usually tell, especially with older people, who is consumed by bitterness and who isn't. But I think you can tell with younger people too, because they become almost ghostly, and then they have like dead eyes, and it just looks like they've lost their humanity. And oftentimes those are going to be the impulsive people, because when you're that unaligned, because that's what it looks like to be unaligned. You have like self-sabotaged and ran away from all of your problems so far. You're not yourself, basically. Like, you're doing things you wouldn't normally do. You're impulsive because the effort that it takes to think about your decisions is going to bring up the emotions and feelings and events that you're running away from. So a great example in relationships, the anxious and avoidant kind of dance that people fall into. Usually the avoidant is running away from their problems and their feelings. That's why they're running away from their relationship, because relationships are incredibly vulnerable. So it's going to be bringing it up. I got to talk slower. Relationships are incredibly vulnerable. So they're going to be bringing up a lot of unresolved feelings from your entire life. And, if you don't know, if you're running away from them, you're not validating them, it's going to affect your decision making. And that's when people, avoidance, oftentimes, they cheat, they'll go break up and then go be with someone immediately after. And, that's usually like not something they would do, and something they will regret later, because they're avoiding their feelings. So they're trying to take these, band-aids, putting it over your leg falling off, They're just looking for the easiest fix, the bare minimum, just to get by. And usually with people like that, they just have to keep self-sabotaging and destroying themselves until their foundation, like they themselves have completely been destroyed, because their coping mechanisms were things that were hurting them. And, it's self-sabotage. What can you do? So when people reach that rock bottom, the only thing they can do is take accountability of their actions and be like, this is my fault. I put myself here. Like, my life is my own to control. And then you build yourself up from there with healthy coping mechanisms and take control of your life. And obviously not everybody goes through that. People just stay there. And that's sad. That's a sad thing. I think if we prioritize mental health more and emotional intelligence, things like that wouldn't really happen. And that's why I don't believe good and evil is real, because it's hurt. Like, people weren't born good and they're not born evil. They're made, people are very much made and influenced. Hate is taught, and it's just hurtful. It's people who have been hurt and don't know how, they're just running away from that. And those are the people who stay at that rock bottom. They're blaming somebody else for how they feel. And I think that is not sympathizing for, or it is sympathizing for bad people and horrible people. And that's not a bad thing. Excusing bad things that bad people do, which, like I said, I don't really think there's like good bad people, but you can label them as such, because, if you're a person that does a lot of bad things, you're a bad person. And, so yeah, good and evil, I don't think it really exists, because it's just people who are aligned and healed, and then people who are unaligned and hurt. So I think it's so important to understand that and know that, so that you can understand the person who hurts you, so you're never left wondering. And that's the most important thing with coping. Every single possibility you have to consider, like, like with the cheating thing, you have to think about it all in like avid detail, right? Or think about how it makes you feel. Like, I feel betrayed, I feel hurt. My little brother knocked on the door. I am the oldest of 6, which is great. Anyway, so yeah, like with the cheating thing, you just have to imagine it all. And then this is where journaling really comes in, which I think a lot of people journal, but I don't think people really journal like this, because this is the work you really need to be doing. And that's why things become so hard to cope with, because the more and more you run away from it, this fear just keeps on getting built up and up. And it's just like, you'll never get over it at that point, because it's so much scarier than it actually is, because you've just been hyping it up over all this time. Which I don't think people are going to hear this and their lives are going to completely change, suddenly they're going to be able to cope, because I think it is important for people to avoid it so much to where they hit rock bottom, so that you can have that experience. Because, my mom always says that the soul craves contrast, so in one life you could have been a good person, and then in another life you could have been a really bad person, because that's just how the pendulum swings, and I don't know. But yeah, I think it is important for a lot of people to have that experience, to know what it is to be that low, so that they can understand themselves better and understand other people. Because, the best people, the most understanding people, the most empathetic people are usually people who have hurt other people pretty badly or been hurt really badly or both, and have recovered from it and have fully coped with it or cope with it enough, you know. So yeah, and then like closure. Closure is great if you've healed enough to receive it, because there is a certain point you have to get to be able to receive that, to be able to receive something genuine and vulnerable. Because a lot of people would just get angry about it. But yeah, I think you have the ability to give closure to yourself, through coping, and then weed and psychedelics. That was another thing I wanted to get into. But to be honest, I don't feel like it. I think that's something I'll talk about another time, maybe. Or actually, I just do. No, I won't. No, I won't. But yeah, so you have to not let go in order to let go. This was a long video.